Of course, contributors to poverty are, well, it's not so good to have a low IQ. You know, people don't like the idea of IQ because it seems so arbitrary. You know, you have a high IQ, well, it's not like you deserve it exactly. You're set up that way pretty much right from the beginning. It's very, 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 very stable. You can make a high IQ person stupider by, you know, not educating them up to the level of their possibility, but taking someone who has a low IQ and trying to raise that, it's like, if you can figure out how to do that, well, you know, it's Nobel Prize time for you, because people have tried that a lot, and most recently with those, you know, lumosity games and that sort of thing, and the evidence that those produce anything other than brilliant performances on the lumosity game itself is basically zero. We haven't been able to figure out how to see, because intelligence is a cross-domain phenomena, and you can get really good in a single domain by practicing like mad, and what you'd want is to practice like mad in a single domain and hope that it generalized to other domains. That's the holy grail of intelligence increase. It's like, no one's done it. People claim it, but the claims never hold up, and people have been trying for a long time to do it, and they haven't been able to do it. And differences in IQ really make a difference. You know, I mean, you guys, average IQ is probably 125, 130. At 115 you're at the 85th percentile, and 115 would barely get you going for a hard university. 130 you're probably graduate school material. You know, 145 you're up there at the range where you can probably do pretty much whatever you want, although as you get smarter the scatter between your abilities increases, so you might have a very high verbal IQ but not be so good at mathematics, or the other way around. But it's a massive contributor to lifetime success, and I don't know what to do about that. I mean, why do smart people make more money? Well, they get to where the edge of production is faster. So if you have 1,000 people and you rank order them by IQ, the smart people are going to come up with the new ideas first, and they're going to have more ideas, and they're going to strategize better. And you know, with an IQ of 90, which is 15% of the population, you think about that, it's 15% of the population. That's pretty much the threshold for reading instructions and being able to follow them. So, you know, and our society is increasingly sophisticated, so it's by no means obvious. You know, the liberals think, well, this society is unfair because there's unemployment, and the conservatives think, well, there's a job for everyone, but none of them think, well, there are massive differences in people's ability, far greater than anyone realizes, and that poses a structural problem. So what happens? Well, Cain makes his offerings and God isn't happy with them. Now, we don't know how Cain figures out that God isn't happy with his offerings. We get some hints of that too, but the story does tell us that's what happens. And so then we get the psychological response on the part of Cain. Now, one response could be, Jesus, I must be doing something wrong. I better straighten myself out. You know, I better come up with a better quality offering and try that again. That isn't what happens. What happens instead is that Cain becomes angry, wroth, and his countenance falls. And so what does that mean? It means this, right? It means he is not happy. He's angry and out for revenge. And so I've been thinking about this a lot lately with regards to the literature on inequality, because there's a very good literature that shows, for example, that there's a measure called the Gini coefficient. And the Gini coefficient is a numerical index of the relative inequality of a geographical locale. So for example, if you went to Newfoundland, where everyone is roughly not very rich, or North Dakota, say, almost everyone there is, say, lower middle class, something like that, or upper working class, something like that. Very little variability, low Gini coefficient, okay? And if you go to Miami Beach, say, where everyone's rich, low Gini coefficient, because it isn't an index of absolute wealth or absolute poverty, it's an index of relative poverty. And so if everyone's rich, the relative poverty is low, and if everyone's poor, the relative poverty is low. Now, one question is, where's the crime? And you might think, well, the crime is where the absolute poverty is high, right? Or the absolute wealth is low. That's where the crime is. That's wrong. If things are relatively distributed in an egalitarian manner, the male-on-male crime, especially homicide, is low. And it's also the case where everyone is rich. But if you go into places where there's some rich people, but not very many, and there's a lot of people who are comparatively poor, then the male homicide rates and violent crime rates amp up substantially. And it's a consequence of male-on-male competition. And so what you could derive from that, and maybe even reasonably, is that you should flatten out the damn income distribution because you're destabilizing the society by facilitating male criminal aggression. You can make a good case for that. You know, in places like Colombia, where the Gini coefficient got unbelievably extreme, society got so violent that it could barely hold itself together. So you can make a conservative argument for redistribution of income, using the observation that if the income distribution gets too extreme, the whole bloody thing starts to destabilize and might fall. But then you also might say, well, wait a minute, is it inequality that's driving the violence? Or is it resentment of the inequality that's driving the violence? Now that's a tough question, because you might say, well, what if the game is rigged and there's no way of moving up the power hierarchy? Well, then maybe anger and the desire for revolution is the appropriate response. But that doesn't really mean to me that the response should be the sort of thing that you see in high Gini coefficient neighborhoods, which is intraracial violence between men. So for example, in neighborhoods where there's high murder rates, the murders are always between young men, and they're always within race. And so that doesn't seem to me to be exactly a politically revolutionary move, right? It's more like violent competition for the sake of attaining status. And you might say, well, that's reasonable, but because the inequality is there and men need to find status because it's part of what drives them forward, it's part of what makes them attractive to women, it's a necessity. Well, the question is, do you attain status through destruction, or do you start making your offerings, putting your offerings in order? And that's something we really need to figure out, because that's a fundamental political question. It's a fundamental political question. Anyways, what happens in this story is that Cain decides that the fact that God isn't accepting his offerings means that he's entitled to become angry and negative. Those two things are both put together, right? He's wroth, he's angry, and he's also depressed. And so he's in a state of mind that, well, I think the best characterization for that is hostile resentment, because it's unfair. It's like, yeah, it's unfair. So what are you going to do about it? You're going to get destructive about it? Or are you going to change your approach? Well, Cain, he does the ultimate thing, and this is what people do when they do the ultimate thing. Because that kind of hostile resentment has an archetypal endpoint. And the archetypal endpoint is the point that you get when you're hostile and resentful because you haven't been successful. And then you go sit in your mother's basement for about 10 years. And then you start imagining just how nice it would be if you shot up the local high school so that everybody knew your name. And what happens is you go from, I'm irritated because things aren't working out for me very well, to I'm irritated and I hate those people for whom things are working out well, to I'm irritated and I hate the fact that the world is set up so that this has happened to me. And then you go to, well, because I'm irritated and hate the world, I'm going to do whatever I can that will destroy it most rapidly and with the highest possible amount of pain and suffering conceivable. And at that point, then you don't just go shoot up the high school, you go up and shoot up the elementary school. And so if you're wondering what kind of pathway people walk down to get to that point, that's the pathway. And the ultimate cap of that is, well, I'll kill the kids because, well, we already know that killing the innocent is a lot more effective than killing the guilty. And then just to cap it off, I'll blow my head off at the end just to show you just how goddamn pointless it all is. And so that's the logical extension of Cain's attitude. And you might think, well, that's a bit of an overreading, and I will say it's not an overreading at all. It's exactly what happens in the text. So it's exactly what follows it. So fine. So Cain is not happy. And so who's he not happy with? Well, he's not happy with God. And so what does that mean? Well, we've already unpacked this. He's not happy with the social contract, because that's part of the spirit, the patriarchal spirit, let's say. And then there's more to it than that, because we've already analyzed what God, the idea of God might represent in the background of this story. He's not happy with the transcendent. He's not happy with the idea of the logos, all of that. No faith in the transcendent. Nothing but He does nothing but despise the social contract, and he's got no faith whatsoever in the logos, let's say, the word that brings chaos out of order. He's got nothing but contempt for all of that. And you know, certainly you know people like that. And if you don't know them, you just go on YouTube and read the comments, and you'll see all sorts of people like that. So they're off to Pleasure Island, dark place. And the coachman opens the gates and lets the delinquents into Pleasure Island, and they basically have a riot. And this is Pleasure Island here. It's full of amusement park rides, and you know, one of the things that's kind of interesting about horror movies, I'm sure you've noticed this, is that they're often set in amusement parks, and clowns are often characters of horror. We'll leave the clowns aside for now, but the amusement park thing, that's pretty interesting. It's like, why in the world would an amusement park be a place of horror? And the first question might be, well, have you ever been to an amusement park? Because there is something about them that's really, they have a dark side, a clear dark side. And part of it is that people with nothing better to do are spending money stupidly, and they're being fleeced by the people who operate the amusement park. You know, and they have, let's say, a stereotypically dark reputation, and they're moving around all the time, which is also something that psychopaths do, and all they're doing is moving from community to community and taking the money from the rubes, fundamentally. And so the amusement park, well, if you walk through an amusement park with that sort of thing in mind, maybe that's also coloring your vision, of course, but it's something that you can see very immediately. So there's something about them that's sort of deeply sad, but there's also there's an underlying horror that characterizes them, that it's easy for horror movie or horror novel writers to immediately expand upon, and there's something about it that makes sense to people. So it's too easy, maybe that's, and it's also all short-term gratification, that's the other thing. So you spend your money very rapidly and it's gone. Yep?
Well, it seems like a sort of a celebration of meanings divorced back from reality.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's the impulsive element. The comment was it's a celebration of meanings divorced from reality. Yeah, it's also outside of reality, right? That's why it's on an island. It's a separate universe. And it's a universe where nothing that's happening is connected to anything outside. And you're spending your hard-earned money, let's say, but it isn't that much, it's certainly not an investment. It's not that much different than burning it. Well, it is, because of course you get some pleasure out of it, but it isn't, going there every day is probably not the wisest move that you could make. So, the animators do a good job of presenting what would you call it, the enforced hedonism, I guess I would say, of a place like that. This is a place where you're going to have fun, that's what it's for.